The sun was just starting to rise over the open stretch of your ranch, casting long golden shadows across the pasture. The air carried that crisp early morning stillness that only country land seems to hold quiet, steady, peaceful. You stood near the wooden gate with a warm mug in your hand, listening to the soft rustle of wind moving through dry grass and the distant sound of cattle shifting lazily in the field. This was why you bought the ranch. Privacy, space, silence. Then you heard it. An engine. Not the familiar hum of your truck. Not the feed supplier. Not a neighbor because your nearest neighbor lived half a mile away. This engine was smooth, refined, expensive. You turned slowly toward the road, just as a white luxury SUV appeared in a cloud of pale dust. It didn't slow down as it approached the entrance. It didn't hesitate. It didn't even tap the brakes. Your gate wasn't fully closed, you'd left it partly open while waiting for a delivery later that morning, but it was clearly marked. A bold sign hung front and center. Private property ranch access only. The SUV rolled forward like the sign didn't exist. For a split second, you assumed the driver would stop and ask for directions. Maybe they were lost. Maybe GPS had sent them the wrong way. But no. The vehicle drove straight through the entrance and onto your gravel path, tires crunching loudly, sending birds scattering from the fence line. You blinked in disbelief. Was this really happening? You set your mug down on the fence post and stepped forward, raising a hand as the SUV approached. The driver slowed slightly but didn't stop completely. The window rolled down halfway. Behind oversized designer sunglasses was a woman who looked more annoyed than apologetic. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, expression sharp enough to cut metal. "Can I help you?" You asked calmly, though your pulse had already quickened. She tilted her head slightly. "Yes, I'm heading through." "Through?" You repeated. "This is private property." She glanced at the ranch road stretching behind you as if inspecting something she planned to purchase. "This connects to the backside of the community," she said. "It's faster than taking the main road." You let out a slow breath. "Ma'am, this is a working ranch. It's not a public road." She actually sighed like you were the inconvenience. "Well, it's always been open." You stared at her. "No, it hasn't. And even if it was, that doesn't make it public." She pushed her sunglasses slightly down her nose and studied you more closely now. "Are you new here?" "I've owned this land for 6 years." She leaned back against her leather seat and gave a tight smile. "I'm on the HOA board." There it was. The confidence. The unspoken assumption that those 5 letters meant authority everywhere within eyesight. "That's nice," you replied evenly. "But this isn't HOA land." Her jaw tightened just slightly. "The previous owner never had a problem with residents using this road." You shook your head. "The previous owner also had a broken fence and cattle wandering into the creek. I'm not running this place the same way." The SUV idled between you, engine purring impatiently. Gravel crunched as she inched forward, another foot testing. You didn't move. "Look," she said, voice firming up. "This saves us 10 minutes. Everyone uses it." "Not anymore." Silence hung thick between you. The breeze shifted dust along the road. A cow load somewhere in the distance. For a moment, you expected an apology, or at least a reluctant nod. Instead, she gave a small, dismissive shrug. "Well, I'm already here." And just like that, she pressed the gas. The SUV rolled past you, not fast, not aggressively, just deliberately. As if your objection had been noted and overruled. You turned, watching the vehicle continue down your gravel path, weaving slightly to avoid a shallow dip in the ground. She drove confidently, like she'd done it before. Which meant she probably had. Your peaceful morning was gone, replaced with something far less pleasant, the creeping realization that this wasn't a one-time mistake. You walked back to the gate slowly, eyes following the dust trail she left behind. The sign hung clearly in place. The boundary was obvious. The message wasn't unclear, yet she drove through anyway. Later that afternoon, after finishing fence repairs near the north pasture, you heard the engine again, right on schedule. The same white SUV approached from the opposite direction now, heading back toward the main road. This time you were ready. You stood directly beside the gate, arms folded. She slowed slightly before stopping just long enough to roll the window down again. "Yes?" she said, impatience laced in her tone. "I meant what I said this morning." "And I meant what I said," she replied smoothly. "This road connects to our neighborhood. It's convenient. It's private," you repeated. She smiled again, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people use when they believe they're winning an argument that hasn't even begun. "You can't just block access like that." The HOA maintains standards around here. You don't maintain my land. Her eyes narrowed behind the sunglasses. We'll see. And with that, she drove off. The dust settled slowly after she disappeared down the road. The ranch returned to silence, but it felt different now, tense, unsettled. You looked at your gate. Solid wood, heavy hinges, clear signage. None of it had mattered, because this wasn't about confusion. It was about entitlement. And as you stood there watching the sun dip lower over your land, one thing became painfully clear. She wasn't going to stop. Not because she misunderstood, but because she didn't think the rules applied to her. The second time she drove through after your warning, it wasn't early morning, and it wasn't subtle. It was late afternoon, the hottest part of the day, when the sun pressed down on the ranch like a weight, and even the wind seemed too tired to move. You were repairing a section of fence along the south pasture when you heard the now familiar sound, that smooth, expensive engine humming in the distance. Your jaw tightened instantly. You didn't need to look up to know who it was. The gravel road that cut through your ranch curved just enough that you couldn't see the entrance from where you stood, but you could hear it. The tires rolling over loose stone, the faint crunch, the steady acceleration. She wasn't even slowing down anymore. You dropped the fencing pliers onto the tailgate of your truck and started walking toward the main path. By the time you reached the bend in the road, the white SUV was already halfway across your property. She had gotten comfortable. That's what bothered you most. This wasn't a confused driver making a mistake. This was routine, deliberate, calculated. You raised both arms this time, stepping directly into the center of the path. The SUV slowed sharply, stopping just a few feet away from you. The front grille gleamed in the harsh sunlight. The window slid down halfway. She didn't remove her sunglasses. Again? You said, unable to hide the edge in your voice. She tilted her head slightly. I told you, this road connects. And I told you it's private. She sighed dramatically, glancing at her dashboard clock as if you were making her late for something important. You're being unreasonable, she said. Residents have used this access point for years. You don't have an easement, you replied. There's no public right-of-way here. She smiled faintly. The HOA will handle it. That sentence hung in the air heavier than the heat. You think the HOA has authority over deeded ranch land? You asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. We maintain standards in this community. This isn't your community, you said firmly. This is my ranch. There was a brief silence. A bird darted across the road, startled by the tension. Somewhere in the pasture, one of the calves let out a soft cry. Then she did something that made your stomach twist. She shifted the SUV slightly to the right, easing her tires toward the edge of the path toward the grass. Testing. You stepped closer. Don't. She looked at you directly now. Move. The single word carried no hesitation. You drive through my pasture and we'll have a different kind of problem. For a second, it looked like she might actually challenge you. The engine revved faintly, then idled again. Finally, she jerked the steering wheel back toward the center and drove forward slowly, this time forcing you to step aside or risk being brushed by the vehicle. You stepped back, but your eyes never left her. As she passed, she muttered just loud enough for you to hear, "This won't last." The dust cloud that followed her lingered long after she disappeared around the bend. That evening you decided enough was enough. You installed a heavier chain across the gate and secured it with a thick weather-resistant lock. You mounted an additional sign in bold red lettering, "No trespassing private property, no HOA access." You even added reflective posts along the edge of the path to make the boundary unmistakable. The next morning, you woke up early and positioned yourself where you could see the entrance clearly from the porch. At 8:17 a.m., like clockwork, the white SUV appeared. She slowed this time. You felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she got the message. The vehicle stopped in front of the locked chain. She sat there for a full 30 seconds. Then the driver's door opened. She stepped out, heels clicking against gravel, sunglasses already in place despite the mild morning light. She examined the chain. Then she did something you hadn't expected. She got back into the SUV, reversed slightly, and steered toward the shallow ditch that ran beside the gate. Your stomach dropped. "No, no, no," you muttered, already running toward the entrance. Her SUV angled carefully, tires pressing into the grass beside the fence line. The ditch wasn't deep, just a slight dip from seasonal runoff, but it was enough to mark a boundary. She eased forward slowly, carefully navigating around the chain, and just like that, she was through again. You reached the gate just as her vehicle straightened onto the gravel path. You stared at the flattened grass and tire tracks cutting across your land. She rolled down her window as she passed you. "You can't block established access," she said calmly. "The board will be in touch." Then she drove off like nothing had happened. You stood there in silence, looking at the fresh damage. The grass would grow back. The ditch wasn't ruined. But that wasn't the point. She hadn't just ignored your warning. She had gone around it, deliberately. Over the next few days, it got worse. Once, you noticed a second vehicle following her through another SUV from the same neighborhood. They drove in a line, like it was an approved route. Another afternoon, you found deep tire impressions where she had cut the corner too tightly, nearly clipping a fence post. Each time, she drove with the same calm confidence. Each time, she acted like your authority over your own property was optional. You pulled the county property records that night, spreading the papers across your kitchen table. Parcel maps, deed descriptions, boundary lines clearly marked. The road was yours. Every inch of it. No shared access. No easement. No HOA claim. Legally airtight. And that's when the frustration turned into something colder. Resolve. Because this wasn't about inconvenience anymore. It wasn't even about shortcuts. It was about someone believing that a title HOA board member gave her control over land she didn't own. She had ignored signs, ignored warnings, ignored physical barriers. And as you looked at the tire tracks cutting through your grass again the next morning, one thought settled firmly in your mind. If she wanted to test boundaries,